The small town of Willow Creek was buzzing with talk about a court case that had everyone's attention. It wasn't just any trial. It was one that could change how people thought about doctors, nurses, and hospitals. At the center of it all was Claire Bennett, a young nurse who worked hard every day to care for her patients. She was kind, smart, and always put others first. But today, she found herself standing in front of a packed courtroom, feeling more nervous than she ever had before. Claire had been asked to come to court because she was an important witness in a big lawsuit. The case involved Dr. Alan Peterson, a well-known doctor at Willow Creek Hospital. He was being accused of making mistakes during a surgery that almost cost a patient their life. Claire had been there when it happened, and now her words would help decide whether Dr. Peterson was guilty or not. When Claire arrived at the courthouse, she didn't have much time to prepare. Earlier that morning, she'd been called into an emergency surgery. A little boy named Liam had come into the hospital with a serious injury after falling off his bike. His parents were frantic, begging the doctors and nurses to save him. Claire had worked tirelessly alongside the surgical team, doing everything she could to keep Liam stable until the operation was over. By the time they finished, Liam was out of danger, but Claire barely had a moment to catch her breath. That's when she got the message reminding her of the court date. There was no time to go home and change. Her scrubs were still covered in smudges from the long hours in the operating room, but she knew she couldn't miss this. So she drove straight to the courthouse, clutching her notes tightly in her hands. As she walked up the steps, she could feel the weight of what was about to happen. This was her chance to tell the truth, even if it meant going against someone as powerful as Dr. Peterson. Inside the courtroom, the air felt heavy. Rows of wooden benches filled with people stretched back toward the doors. Reporters sat near the front, notebooks ready, while worried-looking families huddled together in the back. Nurses and doctors from the hospital were scattered throughout the room, whispering quietly among themselves. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. At the front of the room, Judge Harold Klein sat behind a large desk, his expression stern and unsmiling. He was an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. To his right, Dr. Peterson sat next to his lawyer, Gregory Doyle. Dr. Peterson looked confident, dressed neatly in a suit and tie. Gregory, on the other hand, leaned forward slightly, his pen poised as if he was already planning his strategy. When it was finally time for Claire to take the stand, she felt dozens of pairs of eyes watching her every move. She walked slowly to the witness chair, trying to steady her breathing. Once seated, she placed her hands on her lap, gripping them tightly to hide the fact that they were shaking. She glanced around the room quickly, spotting familiar faces, some supportive, others judgmental, and then turned her attention to the judge. Judge Klein studied her carefully before speaking. "Ms. Bennett," he said in a deep, commanding voice, "before we begin, I need to address your choice of clothing." His tone made it clear that he wasn't happy. "You are appearing in my courtroom as a professional. Is there any reason you couldn't dress appropriately for such an important proceeding?" The room went silent. Claire felt heat rise to her cheeks as she realized what he meant. Her scrubs, though practical for her job, weren't exactly formal attire for a courtroom. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. Across the room, Dr. Peterson exchanged glances with Gregory, who smirked slightly. They clearly thought this was working in their favor. If Claire came across as unprofessional, maybe her testimony wouldn't carry as much weight. This realization only made Claire feel more determined to prove them wrong. As the seconds ticked by, the tension in the room grew thicker. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, eager to see how Claire would respond. Even the reporters stopped scribbling in their notebooks, waiting for her reply. Judge Klein raised an eyebrow, clearly expecting an explanation. Finally, Claire spoke. Her voice was soft at first, but it grew stronger with each word. "Your Honor," she began, choosing her words carefully, "I apologize if my appearance seems disrespectful. However, these scrubs represent something far greater than myself." She paused briefly, glancing down at the fabric covering her, arms and legs. They remind me of the lives I've helped save, the long hours spent caring for patients and the sacrifices made to ensure their safety. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, nobody moved. Then, slowly, heads started nodding in agreement. People in the audience exchanged looks, some smiling faintly, others murmuring softly under their breath. Even Judge Klein seemed to soften slightly, though he maintained his serious demeanor. Gregory, sensing that the situation might be slipping away from him, decided to intervene. Leaning forward, he addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, perhaps Ms. Bennett believes her attire adds to her credibility, though I must say it doesn't quite achieve the intended effect." He chuckled lightly, attempting to lighten the mood and turn the focus back to Claire. To his surprise, however, the laughter he expected didn't come. Instead, the room remained eerily quiet, as if everyone was waiting to hear what Claire would say next. And when she did speak again, her voice carried a strength that caught everyone off guard. "These scrubs aren't just clothes," she continued, her gaze steady and unwavering. "They're a symbol of dedication, to my patients, to my profession, and to doing what's right no matter the circumstances. When I received the summons today, I was called away mid-surgery, a procedure that saved a child's life. If wearing these means I can continue helping others, then I'll wear them wherever I'm needed." Her statement reverberated through the courtroom, leaving an undeniable impact. For many, it was impossible to ignore the sincerity in her voice or the passion behind her words. Claire wasn't just defending her choice of outfit, she was standing up for the values she believed in. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone present that this trial wasn't just about Dr. Peterson, it was about much bigger issues, like accountability, trust, and the true meaning of professionalism. Even Judge Klein seemed affected. He adjusted his glasses, taking a moment to consider Claire's response. Whatever he had expected, it wasn't this. Slowly, he nodded, signaling that the questioning could proceed. But as the trial moved forward, it was obvious that Claire's opening remarks had set the tone for everything that followed. What had started as a simple critique of courtroom decorum had transformed into something far more profound, a testament to the power of integrity and the courage to speak the truth, no matter the cost. And so, as Claire prepared to answer the questions ahead, she did so with renewed confidence. She knew the road wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Whether it was the family members sitting in the gallery, the colleagues who supported her, or the countless patients whose lives she had touched, Claire carried them all with her as she faced the challenges of the day. After Claire's heartfelt response about her scrubs, the courtroom seemed to shift slightly. The initial tension that had filled the air began to ease, replaced by a growing sense of respect for the young nurse. Judge Klein nodded slowly, signaling that he accepted her explanation, though his expression remained stern. He gestured for Gregory Doyle, Dr. Peterson's lawyer, to continue with his questions. Gregory stood up, adjusting his tie as he approached the podium. His demeanor was calm but calculated, like a predator circling its prey. He glanced at Claire, then turned to address the jury. "Ms. Bennett," he started, his voice smooth and measured, "you've made it clear why you're wearing those scrubs today. But let's focus on the matter at hand, the events surrounding the surgery involving my client, Dr. Alan Peterson." Claire took a deep breath, preparing herself for what was coming next. She knew this part wouldn't be easy. Gregory was known for being ruthless in the courtroom, often using clever tactics to trip up witnesses. Still, she reminded herself why she was here, to tell the truth no matter how difficult it might be. "Can you describe your role during the procedure?" Gregory asked, his tone polite but probing. "I was assisting Dr. Peterson during the surgery," Claire replied evenly. "My job was to monitor the patient's vital signs and ensure everything ran smoothly." Gregory nodded, jotting something down on his notepad. Then, without missing a beat, he followed up with another question. "And did you notice anything unusual during the operation?" Claire hesitated for just a moment. This was the part she had been dreading. She knew her answer would put her directly at odds with Dr. Peterson, a man who held significant influence at the hospital. But she also knew she couldn't stay silent. Taking a steadying breath, she spoke clearly. Yes, I did. There were lab results indicating complications that needed immediate attention. I brought them to Dr. Peterson's notice multiple times, but he dismissed them. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some people leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear more, while others exchanged surprised glances. Across the room, Dr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Gregory, however, remained unfazed. He smiled faintly as if he had anticipated this answer. So, you're saying Dr. Peterson ignored critical information? Gregory pressed, his tone sharpening slightly. That's correct, Claire confirmed, her voice unwavering. He chose to proceed without addressing the issues raised by the lab reports. It wasn't until later that we realized how serious the situation was. Gregory paused, letting her words sink in. Then, with a sly grin, he changed tactics. Ms. Bennett, isn't it true that you're relatively new to the field? You've only been working at Willow Creek Hospital for 2 years, correct? Claire felt a flicker of irritation but kept her composure. That's right, she admitted. But experience doesn't determine whether someone can recognize a problem when they see one. The crowd murmured again, some nodding in agreement. Gregory raised an eyebrow, pretending to consider her point. Fair enough, he said smoothly. But isn't it possible that you misinterpreted the lab results? After all, medicine is a complex field, and even experienced professionals sometimes make mistakes. Claire clenched her fists under the table, resisting the urge to snap back. Instead, she responded calmly. No, I didn't misinterpret the results. They were clear and straightforward. What's more, other members of the surgical team expressed concerns as well. This revelation caught everyone off guard. Until now, the focus had been solely on Claire and Dr. Peterson. Hearing that others had shared her concerns added weight to her testimony. Gregory, realizing he was losing ground, quickly tried to redirect the conversation. Let's talk about your relationship with Dr. Peterson, he suggested, leaning casually against the podium. Would you say the two of you have always seen eye to eye? Claire frowned, sensing where this line of questioning was headed. Not particularly, she admitted. We've had disagreements in the past, but that has nothing to do with this case. Gregory smirked, seizing the opportunity. Ah, so there have been disagreements. Could it be that your testimony today is motivated by personal bias rather than professional integrity? The accusation hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. Claire felt her heart race, but she refused to let him rattle her. Looking directly at the jury, she answered firmly, Absolutely not. My priority has always been the safety and well-being of my patients. If I believed Dr. Peterson had acted appropriately, I wouldn't be here testifying against him. Her response earned nods of approval from several members of the audience. Even Judge Klein seemed impressed, though he maintained his neutral expression. Gregory, on the other hand, looked frustrated. He had hoped to paint Claire as unreliable, but her steadfastness was making it difficult. Desperate to regain control, Gregory switched gears once more. Tell me, Ms. Bennett, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. How many surgeries have you personally led? How many lives have you saved on your own? Claire blinked, taken aback by the sudden change in direction. She hadn't expected such a personal question. Before she could respond, a voice rang out from the gallery. She may not lead surgeries, but she saves lives every single day. All heads turned toward the source of the interruption. It was Rachel Dawson, a former patient of Claire's who had recovered from a life-threatening illness thanks to her care. Rachel stood up, tears glistening in her eyes as she addressed the court. Claire stayed by my side when no one else would. She fought for me when doctors wanted to give up. Without her, I wouldn't be here today. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Judge Klein raised his hand, calling for order. Ms. Dawson, please sit down, he instructed gently. This is not the time for commentary. Rachel hesitated, but eventually returned to her seat, still visibly emotional. Claire gave her a small, grateful smile before turning her attention back to Gregory. Despite the interruption, The damage, or perhaps the advantage, had already been done. Rachel's outburst had humanized Claire, reminding everyone present of the compassion and dedication she brought to her work. Gregory, realizing he was fighting a losing battle, decided to wrap up his questioning. "Thank you, Miss Bennett," he said curtly. "I have no further questions for now." As Claire stepped down from the witness stand, she felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The hardest part was over, but the trial was far from finished. She returned to her seat, glancing briefly at Dr. Peterson. His face was pale and beads of sweat dotted his forehead. For the first time, he looked genuinely worried. Meanwhile, the mood in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. People whispered, amongst themselves, sharing stories of their own experiences with Claire and other nurses. Even the jurors appeared moved, their earlier skepticism replaced by admiration. Claire's courage and honesty had struck a chord, and it was clear that her testimony had left a lasting impression. Judge Klein called for a short recess, giving everyone a chance to stretch their legs and reflect on what had transpired. As Claire stepped outside, she was greeted by supportive smiles and kind words from strangers. One elderly woman patted her shoulder, saying, "You did good, dear, real good." Though the outcome of the trial remained uncertain, Claire felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had come to the courtroom expecting judgment and criticism, but instead she found solidarity and understanding. And as she prepared to face whatever came next, she knew she wasn't alone. Whether it was the patients whose lives she had touched, the colleagues who stood by her, or the townspeople who believed in her, Claire carried their support with her every step of the way. When the recess ended, Claire returned to the courtroom feeling a mix of emotions. She was relieved that her testimony had gone well so far, but she also knew there was still much more to come. As she took her seat again, she glanced at the jury, trying to gauge their reactions. Some of them looked thoughtful, while others appeared moved by what they had heard. It gave her hope, though she reminded herself not to get too confident. Gregory Doyle, Dr. Peterson's lawyer, stood up once more. He seemed determined to regain control of the situation after Claire's earlier responses had shifted the mood. In the courtroom, with a calm but calculated demeanor, he approached the podium and began asking new questions. "Ms. Bennett," Gregory said, his tone polite but probing, "you mentioned earlier that you brought concerns about the lab results to Dr. Peterson's attention multiple times. Can you tell us exactly how many times this happened?" Claire thought carefully before answering. "I believe it was 3 times during the surgery," she said. "Each time, I made sure to clearly explain why the results were concerning and urged him to reconsider his approach." Gregory nodded, pretending to write something down. Then, with a slight smirk, he asked, "And did anyone else hear these conversations? Or is it just your word against Dr. Peterson's?" Claire hesitated for a moment. She knew this question was designed to undermine her credibility, but she also knew the truth, and she wasn't going to back down. "Yes, other members of the surgical team were present," she replied firmly. "They can confirm what happened." This answer seemed to catch Gregory off guard. He hadn't expected her to have witnesses to support her claims. For a brief moment, his confident facade faltered, but he quickly recovered. Clearing his throat, he continued, "Even if others were present, isn't it possible that they simply agreed with you because of your strong personality? People often go along with someone who seems certain, even if they're wrong." Claire felt a surge of frustration but kept her voice steady. "No, that's not what happened. These are professionals who care deeply about their patients. They wouldn't risk lives based on blind agreement." The crowd murmured in approval, and Judge Klein raised his hand slightly to quiet them. Gregory, realizing he needed to change tactics, decided to focus on Claire's actions after the surgery. "Let's talk about what happened afterward," he suggested. "You claim that complications arose due to Dr. Peterson's decisions. Did you report these issues to hospital administration immediately?" Claire shook her head. "Not right away," she admitted. "We were focused on stabilizing the patient first. Once the immediate danger passed, I filed a detailed report outlining everything that had occurred." Gregory seized on this admission, leaning forward dramatically. "So, You waited until later to report the incident. Doesn't that raise questions about your priorities? If you truly believed Dr. Peterson acted negligently, shouldn't you have reported it sooner? Claire clenched her fists under the table, reminding herself to stay calm. My priority was always the patient, she explained. Filing reports doesn't save lives. Acting quickly does. Once the patient was stable, I followed protocol and documented everything thoroughly. Her response earned nods of agreement from several jurors. Even Judge Klein seemed to soften slightly, though he remained impartial. Gregory, however, wasn't ready to give up. He tried one last attempt to cast doubt on her testimony. Ms. Bennett, he said, his tone shifting to mock sympathy. It must be stressful working in such high-pressure environments. Is it possible that your memory of events has been influenced by hindsight? Sometimes people reconstruct situations in their minds to make sense of outcomes. Claire met his gaze directly, refusing to let him twist her words. No, my memory hasn't changed, she stated firmly. What I saw and experienced during that surgery is clear in my mind. I've reviewed the records, spoken with colleagues, and confirmed every detail. This isn't about hindsight. It's about facts. The courtroom fell silent as her words hung in the air. Gregory stared at her for a long moment, searching for any sign of weakness. When he found none, he finally stepped back, muttering, "No further questions, Your Honor." As Claire stepped down from the witness stand, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. The hardest part was over, and she had managed to hold her ground despite Gregory's relentless questioning. As she returned to her seat, she noticed Rachel Dawson smiling warmly at her from the gallery. Other spectators whispered encouraging words, their respect for her growing with each passing moment. Next, it was Claire's lawyer's turn to question her. He stood up, his demeanor calm and supportive. "Ms. Bennett," he began, "let's clarify something for the record. You mentioned that other members of the surgical team shared your concerns about the lab results. Could you tell us who those individuals were?" Claire nodded. "Yes, Dr. Ethan Moore and Nurse Lisa Carter were both present when I raised the issue. They expressed similar worries about proceeding without addressing the complications." The lawyer smiled faintly. "Thank you. Now let's talk about the aftermath of the surgery. You mentioned filing a detailed report. Why was it important for you to document everything so thoroughly?" "It's standard procedure," Claire explained. "But beyond that, I wanted to ensure there was a clear record of what happened in case anyone needed to investigate. Transparency is crucial in medicine. It helps prevent mistakes from happening again." Her answer resonated with the jury, who exchanged approving glances. The lawyer continued, "And what would you say to those who might argue that reporting incidents like this could harm the reputation of the hospital or its staff?" Claire's expression grew serious. "Reputation shouldn't come before patient safety. If we ignore problems or sweep them under the rug, we fail as healthcare providers. My duty is to my patients, not to protecting egos." The courtroom erupted into murmurs of agreement. Even Judge Klein leaned forward slightly, nodding almost imperceptibly. Claire's honesty and conviction were impossible to ignore, and it was clear that her testimony was having a profound impact. As the questioning wrapped up, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted entirely. Where there had once been skepticism and tension, there was now admiration and respect. Claire's courage in standing up for what was right, even when it meant challenging someone as powerful as Dr. Peterson, had inspired everyone present. Judge Klein called another short recess, giving the jury time to process what they had heard. As Claire stepped outside, she was greeted by a group of nurses and doctors from the hospital, all offering words of encouragement. One of them, Dr. Ethan Moore, pulled her aside. "You're doing great," he said quietly. "Your testimony is making a difference." Claire smiled, feeling grateful for their support. Though the trial was far from over, she knew she had done everything she could to speak the truth. And as she prepared to face whatever came next, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about winning a case, it was about standing up for integrity, accountability, and the values that mattered most in her profession. Back inside the courtroom, The mood had changed completely. People whispered excitedly, sharing stories of their own experiences with Claire, and discussing how her testimony reflected broader issues within the healthcare system. The trial had become more than just a legal battle. It was a catalyst for meaningful conversation about trust, responsibility, and the importance of speaking out when something is wrong. Though the final verdict remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Claire Bennett had already made a lasting impact. Her courage and dedication had touched the hearts of everyone in the room, reminding them of the power of truth and the difference one person can make when they choose to do what's right. After the short recess, the courtroom reconvened and the trial moved into its next phase. Claire's testimony had already left a deep impression on everyone present, but there was still more to uncover. As she returned to the witness stand, she felt a mix of determination and exhaustion. She knew the hardest parts were behind her, but the stakes remained high. Claire's lawyer stepped forward, ready to continue building her case. He began by asking questions that would shed light on the broader context of the incident. "Ms. Bennett," he said warmly, "can you describe your typical day as a nurse at Willow Creek Hospital? What does your role involve?" Claire thought for a moment before answering. "Every day is different, but my main job is to care for patients and support the medical team. That includes monitoring vital signs, administering medications, assisting during surgeries, and communicating with doctors about any concerns. It's a lot of responsibility, but it's also very rewarding." The lawyer nodded, encouraging her to elaborate. "And how important is communication within the surgical team? Does everyone have a voice?" "Yes, absolutely," Claire replied. "Good communication is essential. During surgeries, every member of the team plays a critical role. If someone notices something unusual or concerning, they're expected to speak up. It's not just about following orders. It's about working together to ensure the best outcome for the patient." Her response resonated with the jury, who exchanged thoughtful looks. The lawyer pressed further. "In this particular surgery, you mentioned bringing concerns to Dr. Peterson's attention multiple times. Can you explain why those lab results were so alarming?" Claire took a deep breath, recalling the details vividly. The lab results showed signs of complications that could have worsened quickly if left untreated. They indicated potential internal bleeding and other issues that required immediate action. Ignoring them put the patient at significant risk. The crowd murmured softly, clearly moved by her explanation. Across the room, Dr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact. His lawyer, Gregory Doyle, scribbled notes, furiously, searching for a way to counter her statements. The lawyer continued, steering the conversation toward the aftermath of the surgery. What happened after the procedure ended? How did the patient recover? The patient stabilized eventually, but it took longer than it should have because of the delayed response to the complications, Claire explained. It was a difficult recovery process for them, both physically and emotionally. Thankfully, they pulled through, but it could have been avoided if we had acted sooner. Her words carried weight, painting a clear picture of the consequences of negligence. The jury listened intently, their expressions growing increasingly sympathetic. Even Judge Klein seemed affected, occasionally glancing at Dr. Peterson with a hint of disapproval. Gregory stood up again, eager to challenge Claire's narrative. "Ms. Bennett," he began, his tone sharp, "you've talked a lot about what you believe happened, but isn't it true that medicine involves making tough decisions under pressure? Sometimes even the best doctors make judgment calls that don't work out as planned." Claire didn't hesitate. "Of course, I understand that mistakes can happen. But this wasn't just a judgment call. This was ignoring repeated warnings from multiple members of the team. There's a difference between taking calculated risks and disregarding critical information." Her answer earned nods of approval from the gallery. Gregory, realizing he was losing ground, changed tactics. "Let's talk about your relationship with Dr. Peterson again. Isn't it possible that personal disagreements influenced how you interpreted his actions?" Claire sighed quietly, knowing this question would come up. "I've never let personal feelings interfere with my work," she said firmly. "My priority has always been the patient. If I believed Dr. Peterson had acted appropriately, I wouldn't be here testifying against him today." Gregory frowned, struggling to find another angle. He tried one last attempt to undermine her credibility. You mentioned earlier that you filed a report after the surgery. Why didn't you go directly to hospital administration instead of waiting to document everything yourself? Claire remained calm, her voice steady. Filing a report is part of our protocol. It ensures there's a formal record of what happened. Going straight to administration without proper documentation wouldn't have been productive. Besides, I wanted to make sure my concerns were backed by evidence, not just accusations. Her response silenced Gregory momentarily. He glanced at Dr. Peterson, who looked increasingly anxious, then muttered, "No further questions, Your Honor." As Claire stepped down from the witness stand, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had answered every question honestly and stood her ground despite the pressure. When she returned to her seat, Rachel Dawson gave her a thumbs up from the gallery, mouthing, "You're amazing." Other spectators smiled warmly, their admiration evident. Next, the prosecution called another key witness, Dr. Ethan Moore, the junior doctor who had assisted during the surgery. As he took the stand, the courtroom fell silent, all eyes on him. Dr. Moore was younger than most of the medical staff, with a quiet confidence that commanded respect. The prosecutor began by asking about his role in the surgery. "Dr. Moore, can you tell us what you observed during the procedure involving Dr. Peterson?" Dr. Moore nodded. "I was assisting Dr. Peterson along with Nurse Bennett. During the surgery, we received lab results indicating complications. Nurse Bennett brought these to Dr. Peterson's attention several times, but he dismissed them." The crowd murmured softly, and Dr. Peterson's lawyer immediately jumped in. "Objection, Your Honor, hearsay," he exclaimed. Judge Klein raised a hand. "Overruled. Proceed, Dr. Moore." The prosecutor continued. "Did you personally agree with Nurse Bennett's assessment of the situation?" "Yes, I did," Dr. Moore replied without hesitation. "The lab results were concerning, and I shared her view that we needed to address them immediately. Unfortunately, Dr. Peterson chose to ignore our input." Gregory cross-examined him aggressively, attempting to discredit his account. "Dr. Moore, isn't it true that you're relatively new to the field? Could it be that your lack of experience led you to misinterpret the results?" Dr. Moore shook his head. "No, that's not true. The results were clear and I wasn't the only one who noticed the problem. Several members of the team expressed similar concerns. Experience doesn't change the fact that the data spoke for itself." His testimony added another layer of credibility to Claire's story, reinforcing the idea that Dr. Peterson had acted irresponsibly. By the time Dr. Moore stepped down, the mood in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. People whispered among themselves, discussing the mounting evidence against Dr. Peterson. Finally, the prosecution called its last witness, Lisa Carter, another nurse who had been present during the surgery. Lisa recounted her own observations, confirming Claire and Dr. Moore's accounts. Her testimony painted a consistent picture of negligence and poor decision-making on Dr. Peterson's part. As the day drew to a close, Judge Klein announced that closing arguments would take place the following morning. Claire left the courtroom, feeling drained but hopeful. She had done everything she could to tell the truth, and the support she received from colleagues, patients, and strangers alike gave her strength. Outside, Rachel approached her with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for standing up for what's right," she said softly. "You've inspired all of us." Claire smiled, touched by the sentiment. Though the outcome of the trial was still uncertain, she knew she had made a difference, not just in the courtroom, but in the hearts of those who believed in her cause. And as she prepared for the final day of the trial, she reminded herself of why she became a nurse in the first place, to help others, no matter the cost. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation as everyone gathered for the final day of the trial. Claire arrived early, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. She knew today would be crucial. The closing arguments would shape how the jury viewed the entire case. As she took her seat, she glanced around the room, noticing familiar faces in the gallery. Rachel Dawson was there again, along with other patients and colleagues who had come to show their support. Even Dr. Ethan Moore and Nurse Lisa Carter had returned, sitting quietly near the front. When Judge Klein entered the room, the murmurs faded and the atmosphere grew tense. He nodded briefly before signaling for the prosecution to begin its closing statement. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man named Mr. Harris, stood up and adjusted his tie. His demeanor was calm but commanding as he approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady and clear. "This case is not just about one surgery or one doctor. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that every patient receives the care they deserve, free from negligence or disregard." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "You've heard testimony after testimony confirming what happened during that fateful surgery. Nurse Claire Bennett, Dr. Ethan Moore, and Nurse Lisa Carter all agreed on one thing. Critical lab results were ignored, putting the patient's life at risk. These weren't minor concerns. They were red flags that demanded immediate attention." Mr. Harris turned toward the jury, making eye contact with each member. Dr. Alan Peterson chose to dismiss these warnings despite being told multiple times by qualified professionals. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was a failure to act responsibly. And because of that failure, the patient suffered unnecessarily. The crowd listened intently, their expressions ranging from anger to sadness. Across the room, Dr. Peterson shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His lawyer, Gregory Doyle, scribbled notes furiously, preparing for his own argument. Mr. Harris continued, his tone growing more passionate. "Nurse Bennett didn't come here seeking revenge or attention. She came here because she believes in doing what's right, for her patients, for her profession, and for the community. Her courage in speaking out should inspire us all. We owe it to her, and to every patient who trusts their lives to medical professionals, to hold those in power accountable." He concluded by urging the jury to consider the evidence carefully. This isn't just about deciding guilt or innocence. It's about sending a message that negligence has consequences. Let's make sure this never happens again. When Mr. Harris finished, the courtroom erupted into quiet murmurs of agreement. Judge Klein raised his hand, calling for silence before turning to Gregory Doyle. "The defense may now present its closing argument." Gregory stood up, smoothing his jacket as he walked to the podium. His expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed a hint of desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice smooth and measured. "What you've heard over the past few days is a story, a narrative crafted to paint my client in the worst possible light." He paused, glancing at the jury before continuing. "Yes, complications arose during the surgery, but complications happen every day in medicine. No procedure is without risk, and no doctor can predict every outcome. What you must ask yourselves is whether Dr. Peterson acted recklessly, or whether he made a difficult decision under pressure, as doctors often do." Gregory's tone shifted slightly, becoming almost sympathetic. "Nurse Bennett is a dedicated professional, no doubt about that. But dedication doesn't mean infallibility. She interpreted the lab results one way, while Dr. Peterson, with decades of experience, saw them differently. Is it fair to punish him for exercising his judgment?" The crowd exchanged skeptical looks, unconvinced by his reasoning. Gregory pressed on, attempting to cast doubt on the credibility of the witnesses. "And let's not forget, none of the other team members reported the incident immediately. If they truly believed something was wrong, why wait? Could it be that their memories have been influenced by hindsight?" His final plea was aimed directly at the jury. "I urge you to look beyond emotions and focus on the facts. Medicine is complex, and mistakes happen. But punishing a skilled doctor for doing his best won't help anyone. Let's not lose sight of the bigger picture." When Gregory finished, the courtroom fell silent. Judge Klein thanked both sides for their arguments and instructed the jury to deliberate. As the jurors filed out of the room, Claire felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She had done everything she could. Now it was out of her hands. Outside the courtroom, people gathered in small groups discussing what had just transpired. Rachel approached Claire, offering a reassuring smile. "No matter what happens, you've already made a difference," she said softly. "People are talking about this case everywhere. You've started something important." Claire nodded, grateful for the kind words. Other colleagues joined in, expressing their admiration and support. Even Dr. Ethan Moore stepped forward, patting her shoulder gently. "You handled yourself incredibly well," he said. "Whatever the verdict, you've earned everyone's respect." As the hours passed, the wait became agonizing. Claire tried to distract herself by pacing outside the courthouse, but her mind kept replaying the trial. She thought about the patient whose life had hung in the balance, the colleagues who had stood by her side, and the countless others who depended on nurses like her every day. Finally, late in the afternoon, the jury returned. The courtroom filled quickly as everyone took their seats, bracing for the verdict. Judge Klein asked the foreman to stand. "Has the jury reached a decision?" he inquired. The foreman nodded solemnly. "We have, Your Honor." A hush fell over the room as the foreman handed the verdict slip to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. After scanning it briefly, Judge Klein looked up and addressed the court. "Will the defendant please rise?" Dr. Peterson stood reluctantly, his face pale and drawn. The foreman cleared his throat and read aloud, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Dr. Alan Peterson, guilty of negligence." The room erupted into gasps and murmurs. Some people clapped softly, while others simply sat in stunned silence. Claire exhaled deeply, tears welling up in her eyes. It was over. Justice had been served. Judge Klein banged his gavel to restore order. "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, for your service. Sentencing will be scheduled at a later date." As the proceedings concluded, Claire stepped outside, overwhelmed by emotion. Reporters swarmed around her, asking for statements, but she declined to comment. Instead, she turned to the friends and colleagues who had supported her throughout the trial. Together, they celebrated quietly, knowing that this victory was about more than one person. It was a step toward greater accountability and trust in healthcare. Though the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, Claire felt a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced fear and uncertainty head-on, proving that standing up for what's right could inspire change. And as she walked away from the courthouse, surrounded by loved ones, she knew she had made a lasting impact, not just in the courtroom, but in the hearts of everyone who believed in her cause. The verdict echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap, leaving an indelible mark on everyone present. Dr. Alan Peterson stood frozen, his face pale as he absorbed the weight of the jury's decision. Guilty. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. For Claire Bennett, however, it was a moment of vindication, a validation of everything she had fought so hard to achieve. As Judge Klein dismissed the court, the room buzzed with activity. Reporters scrambled to get statements from those involved, their cameras flashing relentlessly. Spectators whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding in approval. Claire remained calm amidst the chaos, her thoughts swirling with emotion she couldn't quite put into words. Relief, pride, and even sadness mingled inside her as she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Outside the courthouse, the crowd spilled onto the steps, eager to catch a glimpse of Claire or hear what she might say. Friends, colleagues, and strangers alike gathered around her, offering congratulations and words of encouragement. Rachel Dawson stepped forward first, hugging Claire tightly. "You did it," Rachel said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You stood up for all of us." Claire smiled faintly, brushing away a tear. "I didn't do it alone," she replied softly. "Everyone who supported me made this possible." Dr. Ethan Moore nodded in agreement, standing close by. "This isn't just your victory, it's a win for every nurse, doctor, and patient who believes in doing the right thing. You've set a precedent here." The significance of the trial wasn't lost on anyone. It wasn't just about holding Dr. Peterson accountable. It was about shining a light on systemic issues within the healthcare system. Nurses and junior doctors often found themselves silenced when they tried to speak out against negligence or poor decisions. Claire's courage had given them a voice, inspiring others to follow her example. Reporters pushed closer, calling out questions. "Ms. Bennett, how does it feel to have won this case?" one asked. Another pressed. Do you think this will lead to changes in hospital policies? Claire hesitated before responding. Though she wanted to share her thoughts, she knew this moment wasn't just about her. This case has shown that accountability matters, she began, her voice steady, despite the whirlwind around her. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about learning from mistakes and making sure patients come first. I hope this encourages hospitals everywhere to listen more closely to their staff and prioritize transparency. Her words resonated deeply, earning nods of agreement from those nearby. Even some of the reporters paused, jotting down her remarks with renewed respect. Claire's humility and focus on the bigger picture only added to the admiration people felt for her. As the media attention continued, Claire eventually excused herself, retreating to a quieter corner of the courthouse steps. There, she was joined by Lisa Carter, another nurse who had testified during the trial. Lisa handed her a cup of coffee, smiling gently. "You deserve a break after all this," Lisa said. "Take a moment to breathe." Claire accepted the gesture, gratefully sipping the warm drink as she watched the scene unfold. Despite the noise and excitement, she felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't the end of her fight. It was just the beginning. By speaking out, she had sparked a conversation that needed to happen, one that would hopefully lead to meaningful change. Later that evening, Claire returned home to find her apartment filled with small tokens of appreciation from friends and coworkers. A bouquet of flowers sat on her dining table, accompanied by a card signed by nearly everyone at Willow Creek Hospital. "Thank you for being brave," it read. "We're proud to work alongside you." Tears welled up in Claire's eyes as she read the message. She hadn't realized how much her actions meant to others until now. This trial wasn't just about proving negligence. It was about fostering trust and collaboration within the medical community. Her willingness to stand up for her beliefs had reminded everyone of the values they shared: compassion, integrity, and a commitment to patient care. Over the following weeks, the impact of the case rippled far beyond Willow Creek. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting Claire's testimony and the broader implications of the verdict. Medical journals published articles discussing the importance of listening to frontline staff, while advocacy groups used the case as an example of why accountability matters. Hospitals across the country began reviewing their protocols, ensuring that concerns raised by nurses and junior doctors were taken seriously. For Claire, life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such a transformative experience. She went back to work at Willow Creek, greeted warmly by patients and colleagues alike. Some called her a hero, though she insisted she was simply doing her job. "Heroes wear capes," she joked lightly. "I just wear scrubs." Still, there was no denying the difference she had made. Patients thanked her profusely, sharing stories of how her dedication had inspired them to trust their caregivers again. Colleagues approached her with newfound confidence, knowing they had someone in their corner if they ever needed to speak out. Even hospital administrators seemed more open to feedback, implementing reforms aimed at improving communication and accountability. One day, as Claire walked through the halls of Willow Creek, she noticed a new plaque mounted near the entrance. It read, "In honor of courage and integrity, dedicated to those who speak up for what's right." Beneath the inscription was a photo of Claire, smiling warmly in her scrubs. She stopped in her tracks, stunned by the gesture. "I didn't know they were doing this," she murmured to Dr. Ethan Moore, who happened to be passing by. He chuckled softly. "They wanted to honor you properly," he explained. "You've become a symbol of hope for everyone here." Claire shook her head, humbled by the recognition. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just told the truth." "And sometimes," Ethan replied, "that's the bravest thing anyone can do." As the months passed, Claire continued to dedicate herself to her work, always putting her patients first. She also became an advocate for healthcare reform, speaking at conferences and workshops about the importance of transparency and teamwork. Her story reached countless professionals, reminding them that their voices mattered and that change was possible when people stood together. Looking back, Claire realized the trial had changed her in ways she never expected. She had faced fear, doubt, and criticism, yet emerged stronger and more determined than ever. The experience had taught her the power of resilience and the importance of staying true to her values, no matter the cost. And so, as she donned her scrubs each morning, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, Claire carried with her the knowledge that she had made a difference, not just in the courtroom, but in the lives of everyone she touched. Whether it was saving a child during surgery, comforting a worried family, or inspiring a colleague to speak up, she knew her work was far from over. But she also knew she wasn't alone. Together, they were building a future where honesty, compassion, and accountability reigned supreme, a future worth fighting for.